Okay, good morning, everybody. So thank you guys for coming. So you guys should get extra point, right? Okay. So I just wanted to go over the stuff that we discussed last class, and then we're going to start talk about the new stuff, right? Lipoprotein. So we and talk about the cholesterol synthesis. Again, involve many steps, reactions, and what you need to remember is what is the key enzyme for cholesterol synthesis. Do you guys still remember? HMG-CoA reductase, right? Reductase, and then how cholesterol synthesis is regulated, basically how HMG-CoA reductase is regulated. And here is the slide for the regulation of cholesterol synthesis. So, for example, under the fat condition, right, insulin and upregulates, increase, that can increase the cholesterol synthesis, and also thyroid hormone as a positive regulators, right, of cholesterol synthesis. But the other type of nutritional status, for example, starvation or glucagon, which related to the starvation, right, the hormone, will inhibit cholesterol synthesis or inhibit HMG-CoA reductase. And the two substrates that is very important regulates cholesterol synthesis are the cholesterol and mevronate, right, the substrate. So once these two substrate levels increase, then the HMG-CoA reductase will be inhibited, right? So then cholesterol synthesis will be slowed down. And we also talk about the little bit, the mechanism how cholesterol or mevronate regulates the HMG-CoA reductase, basically regulates transcription of a HMG-CoA, right? And we also introduced a transcription factor, SIEBP, the sterol regulatory element binding protein, and this protein. This transcription factor basically directly control the transcription or expression of HMG-CoA reductase, and cholesterol or mevronate basically, inhibits this transcription factor activity, so then inhibits the transcription of HMG-CoA reductase, right? So this pretty much, all I think the important information that you need to know for cholesterol synthesis. Now let's talk about the lipoproteins. We mentioned a couple of times, right, when we talk the transport of triglyceride from intestine, small intestine, or from the liver to fat tissue. So lipoproteins, have you heard about this, right? I think in whatever class that you had before. So we have a 5 basically the different lipoproteins, right, in our body, particularly present in the plasma, in the circulation. And the main function of the lipoproteins is, what is the main function? What is the function of lipoprotein? Why we need lipoprotein? Carrier lipids, right? So transport lipids between tissues. So this is the main function. And why we need 5 different, or basically 4 actually, 4 different lipoproteins. Because we have a different type of lipids, right? Triglyceride, cholesterol. So we need a different type of lipoprotein to carry or transport a different type of lipids. So, like we have a chylomicron, VLDL, and is very low density lipoprotein, and intermediate density lipoprotein IDL, and the LDL, low density lipoprotein, and HDL, high density lipoprotein. So the density of the lipoprotein basically, depend on how much protein that lipoprotein contain, right? So that basically determines the density of a lipoprotein, or the ratio, the lipids to the protein ratio. It kind of depends, determine the density. So chylomicron is the largest lipoprotein. Right? The size is the largest compared to other lipoproteins. And the VLDL is second largest, right? So chylomicron is the largest, and VLDL is the second largest lipoprotein. And LDL and HDL are the most abundant lipoprotein in the plasma. The reason, because of these two lipoprotein, LDL and HDL, the turnover rate is kind of slow, so they, maintain maintain in the plasma. So that makes these two lipoprotein protein levels high, or concentration high in the plasma. So lipoprotein, here is a structure, the components of lipoprotein, and how lipoprotein is constituted, right? So basically it has two main parts. One is so-called core lipids core, right? So, lipoprotein just like a ball, right? And inside of the ball are the lipids that the lipoprotein carries, right? And the surface of a lipoprotein basically is a monolayer of the phospholipids, and also contain the free, this is phospholipids, like the monolayer phospholipids, and also some free cholesterol on the surface of the lipoprotein. And inside there is lipids core. So lipids core contains different type of lipids depend on what type of lipoproteins, right? For example, chylomicron and VLDL are considered sort of triglyceride-rich lipoprotein. So it means that this two type of lipoproteins contain mostly triglyceride and then also cholesterol. But the cholesterol in the core usually present in the form of a cholesterol esters, right? So cholesterol esters usually present in the core, and free cholesterol present on the surface of the lipoprotein, right? And in addition to lipids on the surface of lipoprotein, it also contains some proteins called apoproteins, right? So apoproteins, it's very important for the lipoprotein function. So this is just a different version of the lipoproteins, right? So inside the lipid core contain basically triglyceride and cholesterol ester, and the composition of or the percentage of triglyceride versus cholesterol ester depends, on the different type of lipoprotein. And the surface basically is a monolayer of phospholipids and free cholesterol, and also apoproteins, right, on the surface of the lipoprotein. Okay, so apoproteins or apolipoproteins. So again, this type of protein usually present on the surface of a lipoprotein, right? Complex. There are actually several different types of apoproteins. The have ApoA 1, 2, and 4, and ApoB basically have two types: ApoB, B48, B100, and ApoC, ApoC 1, 2, 3, and ApoE, right? So these are the apoproteins that are usually present in the on the surface of a lipoprotein. And again, not every apoprotein that are present in the every type of the apoprotein. Okay, we're going to go to that in more detail. So what are the functions of the apoprotein? There are a couple of functions. First is some of the apoprotein can serve as so-called cofactors for enzymes. For example, here's a good example here. You try to remember, right? The ApoC2 usually present on the surface of chylomicron and VLDL, right? And ApoC2 is very important for lipoprotein lipase enzyme activities, right? So ApoC2 work together with the lipoprotein lipase to hydrolyze triglyceride in both chylomicron and VLDL, right? To break down triglyceride and release fatty acids, if you still remember, right? The function of a lipoprotein lipase, LPL. And LPL function needs ApoC2 help, right? So ApoC2 serve as a cofactor for lipoprotein lipase activities. This is one of the functions of apoproteins. And second, apoprotein also serve as sort of a structure integrity. So apoprotein basically can stabilize lipoproteins, right? And third is some of the apoprotein can function as a ligand for receptors, right? So, for example, ApoE and ApoB100 usually can act as a ligand for receptor for LDL receptors. So LDL receptors can recognize the lipoproteins, basically LDL, right? But basically it recognizes specifically ApoE and ApoB100. Okay, is that clear? I mean, LDL is one of the lipoprotein, right? So it binds LDL receptor in order to be uptake into the cell. And LDL receptor can only recognize lipoprotein that has a ApoE or ApoB100 on the surface, right? So again, the ApoE or ApoB100 is needed for LDL binds to LDL receptors. Okay, so last function of apoproteins is to suspend the lipids in the plasma, right? So these are the most important functions of apoproteins. Okay, so here's a table. Just summarize the different type of apoproteins, their composition. So what type of lipids present in the core in each lipoproteins, right? And what is the percentage? How much, of the lipids that are present in the different type of lipoproteins, and also the surface lipids and apoproteins. What type of apoprotein present in different type of lipoproteins. So, for example, chylomicron and VLDL we know are the triglyceride-rich lipoproteins, right? And the core lipids basically have two types: triglyceride and cholesterol ester. CE is a cholesterol esters, right? TG is triglyceride. So core lipids basically has two types of core lipids, right? Either triglyceride or cholesterol esters. And different type of lipoproteins contain different percentage of the triglyceride or cholesterol esters. So since chylomicron and VLDL are triglyceride-rich lipoprotein, so that means in the core of these two lipoproteins, there's more triglyceride, right, than cholesterol esters. For example, chylomicron contains 85 to 95 of core lipids as triglyceride, and VLDL, contain the 55 to 65, right, triglyceride. Again, it's 50 to 65 of core lipids is triglyceride, and only a relatively small percentage of lipids are the cholesterol ester, right? So cholesterol ester only account for the small percentage in the core lipids of these two lipoproteins. And if you look at the LDL and HDL, they have more. These two lipoproteins we consider is the cholesterol-rich lipoproteins. So we have more cholesterol esters, right, in the core lipids, and less triglyceride in the core lipids. So once you know that the composition of core lipids, then you can probably easy to understand the function of this different type of lipoproteins. So chylomicron and VLDL basically is transport mainly triglyceride, right, to help with triglyceride transportation. And LDL and HDL basically deal with the cholesterol, right, transport and metabolism. And then let's look at the apoproteins. So chylomicron surface has a ApoB48, ApoC2, C3, and ApoE, and VLDL also contains ApoC2, 3, and ApoE. But the difference, the apoprotein that are present in chylomicron and VLDL is ApoB. So ApoB48 is the apoprotein that present in the chylomicron. Because of chylomicron, ApoB48 is synthesized in the small intestine, right? And chylomicron is also synthesized in the small intestine, so that makes sense, right? So the chylomicron usually contain ApoB48, and the VLDL, which tissue that synthesizes most VLDL? Still remember? Chylomicron we know is synthesized in the small intestine, right? What about VLDL? Which tissue? Everyone know? No? Liver, right? So liver is the main tissue that synthesizes VLDL, and also synthesize ApoB100. So the ApoB100 is main ApoB proteins, right, on the surface of VLDL. And also we just mentioned ApoC2 is the apoprotein that help lipoprotein lipase activity, right, function. So that also makes sense because these two lipoproteins, chylomicron and VLDL, carry triglyceride mainly, right, from either small intestine or liver to the adipose tissue. So lipoprotein, LPL, lipoprotein lipase, as the enzyme, if you still remember, that catalyze the hydrolysis of triglyceride, right, and release fatty acids in both chylomicron and the VLDL. And LDL is relatively simple. It only has a ApoB100 on cells on its surface, and HDL has ApoA1 and ApoA2, right, on its surface. All right, any questions so far? Okay, so remnant lipoprotein. Remnant lipoprotein basically is the product of the circulating lipoprotein, or product of a hydrolysis of the lipoprotein. Right, because of lipoprotein, main function of lipoprotein is to transport lipids, right, to deliver lipids from one tissue to the other tissue. And once it's delivered to the other tissue, then the core lipids will be hydrolysis, right? For example, triglyceride, right, delivered from liver or from intestine to adipose tissue, then triglyceride being hydrolysis by lipoprotein lipase, and lipid will be released from lipoprotein, right, as in the form of fatty acids. So the lipids core will be reduced once it's reached to the destination, right? So the remnant of lipoprotein is the lipoprotein that have reduced the lipid volume in the core because of, you already finished your job, right? You deliver lipids to the tissue. So the remnant basically is the product of the lipoproteins. So for example, chylomicron, I just described, synthesized in the small intestine and carries triglyceride and transport the triglyceride to the adipose tissue, and triglyceride in the chylomicron hydrolyzed by LPL and released fatty acids, and fatty acids then be taken up by adipose tissue, right? So chylomicron then become the chylomicron remnant. And if you compare the core lipids volume, the chylomicron remnant has much less triglyceride, right, than the chylomicron. And chylomicron remnant eventually, be taken up by the liver. And similar for the VLDL, right? VLDL, once it's arrived the adipose tissue and hydrolyzed, triglycerides hydrolyzed by LPL and fatty acids released and picked up by fat tissue. So VLDL can also become remnant, which is a IDL, right? So IDL or LDL is considered the VLDL remnant. Okay, so here's a question. What is the difference between chylomicron and chylomicron chylomicron remnant in terms of a lipid composition in the core. You know, like a volume or percentage of triglyceride. Sorry? Right, change is the composition of triglyceride, right? So you have a less triglyceride in the chylomicron remnant, right? Compared to the chylomicron, because of it's already been released and transferred to the adipose tissue, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Now let's talk about chylomicron. So what are the core lipids in chylomicron? I will show you the table, right? You still remember what? Triglycerides and cholesterol esters, right? So both, but I highlight triglyceride mean that the have a more triglyceride in the core in the chylomicron than the cholesterol esters, right? So about 85% of lipids, core lipids, are triglyceride. And what are the apoproteins that are present on the surface of chylomicron? And which type of ApoB protein? 48, yes. So ApoB48 and also ApoA124 and ApoC2, right? 3 ApoE. So I think you guys just wanted to remember ApoB48 and ApoC2, right? And since ApoC2 is very important for which enzymes activate function, which enzymes activate that requires ApoC2? Lipoprotein lipase, right? LPL, okay, and also ApoE, right? So 3 important. Try to remember 3 most important apoproteins that are present in the chylomicron are ApoB48, because ApoB48 basically is synthesized in the small intestine, and ApoC2 is important because it helps lipoprotein lipase function, right? And also ApoE, and ApoE is very important for the what is ApoE function? For the LDL receptor, right, binding. Okay, synthesis. Which tissue synthesizes the chylomicrons? Small intestine, yes. So small intestine is a place where chylomicron synthesized. And where does triglyceride in chylomicron come from? Where does? Yeah, from diet, right? From diet. So basically, absorb it. And ApoB is made from anthracite, right? Okay. So all this information is important for chylomicron. Again, chylomicron is the largest lipoprotein, and is also triglyceride-rich lipoprotein. So the main function of chylomicron is to transport triglyceride from small intestine, which initially from diet, and to the adipose tissue for storage, right? Now let's talk about the metabolic fate of chylomicrons. So how chylomicron is metabolized? How chylomicron does its function, right? In general, chylomicron is transport triglyceride, again from small intestine to fat tissue. So the dietary triglyceride, right, once absorbed into the enterocytes and synthesized back to the triglyceride and packed into the chylomicron. So chylomicron is synthesized in the small intestine, and the purpose is to carry dietary triglyceride to the adipose tissue for storage, right, which usually happens in the fat condition. And chylomicron firstly is synthesized in the form so-called nascent chylomicron. So nascent chylomicron, we have the full load of lipids, right, from the intestine, but some of the apoproteins is not ready yet, right? So the nascent chylomicron contains full amount of lipids in the core, but still missing or lacking some of the apoprotein on the surface. So again, B48 is synthesized in the small intestine, so it's already there, and ApoA protein is also on the surface. And then once then the chylomicron then released into the circulation and get the another type of apoprotein, for example, ApoC and ApoE from HDL, right? And finally, chylomicron become mature, right? Mature chylomicron, so contain everything, right? The lipids and also all the apoproteins. So mature chylomicron arrived adipose tissue, right? And the one important step before triglyceride can be released from the chylomicron and picked up by fat tissue is the lipoprotein lipase activity, right? So lipoprotein lipase that are involved in this process. So lipoprotein lipase in the fat condition is synthesized and released from adipose cell, right? And again, this LPL activities requires ApoC2. So ApoC2 is already on the surface of a chylomicron, or mature chylomicron, so can help the LPL function, can help LPL to function and hydrolyze triglyceride in the chylomicron, right, and release fatty acids, and these fatty acids then be uptake into the fat tissue for storage, right? And once the triglyceride being released from chylomicron, and chylomicron then become chylomicron remnant. So if you compare the volume of the core in chylomicron remnant to mature chylomicron, you see much less, right, triglyceride left in the chylomicron remnant. So the majority of triglyceride is already being released, right, by LPL and work together with the ApoC2, right? And also the some of the apoproteins, ApoA and ApoC, will also released and go back to the recycle, go back to the HDL. So the chylomicron remnant eventually being taken up by the liver because of chylomicron remnant still has the ApoE protein, right, on its surface. And again, ApoE, we know that is very important for binding of the LDL receptors, right? So chylomicron remnant basically pick up by liver through the LDL receptor mediated mechanism, right? So this is sort of the whole process of a chylomicron metabolism, right? And the overall purpose of this cycling or the process is to transport the triglyceride from small intestine to the adipose tissue for storage under the fat condition, right? And you just wanted to remember the ApoC2 that are involved in this process to help release of triglyceride from chylomicron, right, by hydrolyzing triglyceride and release fatty acids. Any questions? All right. This is just an overall summary of the chylomicron metabolism. So this is a mature chylomicron, right? It has a lipid core and the 4 different type of apoprotein. And once it's arrived in the adipose tissue, the 90% of triglyceride in the chylomicron core being released, right, by LPL and together with ApoC, right, ApoC2. And also the ApoA and ApoC also released from chylomicron and get back to the HDL. And eventually chylomicron and become chylomicron remnant, with the 90% of triglycerides gone, right? And the chylomicron remnant eventually then pick up by liver through the LDL receptor mediated mechanism we're going to talk about later, right, in more detail. And the triglyceride in chylomicron remnant, because it's whole thing being taken up by the liver, right? So the triglyceride in the chylomicron remnant is hydrolyzed eventually by a different enzyme called hepatic lipase, right? This is different from lipoprotein lipase. So again, the chylomicron, the triglyceride in chylomicron usually is hydrolyzed or released by LPL, right? But the chylomicron remnant triglyceride is hydrolyzed in the liver and by the hepatic lipase, a different enzyme, right? Okay, so here's a question. So which enzyme hydrolyzes triglyceride in chylomicron? LPL, right? And which enzyme hydrolyzes the triglyceride in chylomicron remnant? Hepatic lipase, right? Okay. Okay, now I think we finished the chylomicron. Any questions? Is that clear? So what is the function of chylomicron? Why we need a chylomicron? What's that? Yeah, from small intestine, right? From the diet, basically, to carry triglyceride from small intestine to adipose tissue for storage. So which tissue synthesizes chylomicron? Small intestine. What type of ApoB protein on the chylomicron surface? 48. So which tissue synthesizes 48? B48. Small intestine, yes. What are the core lipids in the chylomicron? The majority of lipids. The triglyceride, right? How much? Percentage? 85 or 95, right? So it's really a lot. Okay. And So what are the apoprotein that present in the Carmichael remnant? B48 and E, right? Okay, so which apoprotein that is needed or that required for lipoprotein lipase activity? ApoC2, right? Okay. Okay, well, that's a question. So what about the core lipids, the percentage of triglyceride in the core in the Carmichael remnant, if you compare to the mature Carmichael one? More or less? Or less, okay. So where does this triglyceride go? In the Carmichael adipose tissue, right? For storage. Okay, very good. Let's see. Okay, VLDL. So the second largest lipoprotein. What are the core lipids in the VLDL? Triglyceride and cholesterol esters, right? And still triglyceride, you have more triglyceride than cholesterol ester in the VLDL core. Apoproteins, ApoB, 100, right? And what do you think? VLDL should also have ApoC2, right? Why? Okay. ApoB 100, right? And ApoC2. Because of VLDL is also carried triglyceride, not from small intestine but from liver, right, to the adipose tissue. And also same process, right? You need a lipoprotein lipase to hydrolyze triglyceride in VLDL. So that's why VLDL also needs ApoC2. So synthesis, where are VLDL synthesized? In the liver, right? So liver synthesizes VLDL basically. And where do triglyceride in VLDL come from? We have 3 points, right, for this. First is actually de novo synthesis from dietary carbohydrate. You know that under the fat condition, right, particularly when we have a higher carbohydrate in the diet, then extra carbohydrate or surplus carbohydrate will need to be converted to fatty acids, right? Lipogenesis increased in a fat condition, and this fatty acids converted from carbohydrate needs to be transported to the adipose tissue and stored there, right? So the triglyceride basically is from de novo synthesis or de novo lipogenesis. And second, the sources of the fatty acids for triglyceride in VLDL is the long-chain fatty acids internalized by the liver from the plasma lipoprotein remnant. We just talked about Carmichael, right? Carmichael remnant eventually is taken up by liver. but chylomicron still contains some leftover, right? The triglyceride leftover. So this could be also the sources of triglyceride that can repack into the VLDL and be released again and transported to the adipose tissue second time, right, or something like this. And the last is the unesterified free fatty acids. This something will happening during the fasting, right? When we have a lot of fatty acids being mobilized from fat tissue, and these fatty acids need to be, some of the fatty acids just directly go to the muscle for utilization, right, for energy, but some of the fatty acids can be picked up by the liver, and liver then repacked, resynthesized to triglyceride and packed into VLDL. So VLDL then be transported from liver to muscle, right? So again, the destination of VLDL is different depending on the nutritional state, right? And the fat condition, VLDL, majority of VLDL actually goes to the liver, to the adipose tissue for storage. And during the fasting, we still have liver still can synthesize them VLDL, right? And the fatty acids basically is from adipose tissue, and this during the fasting, the VLDL basically go to the muscle, and muscle picks up fatty acids from VLDL and oxidize, right, for energy. So the different metabolic consequences. And also, last point is the ApoB100 basically synthesized in the liver, right? So the chylomicron and VLDL usually have a different type of ApoB proteins, right? Because of the the place that this synthesis is different. All right, shall we take a break? All right, are we ready? So, VLDL, right? We just briefly described what are the VLDL functions and what are the composition of the core lipids in the VLDL, where does the triglyceride in the VLDL come from, right? We from actually three main sources. One is the de novo lipogenesis, and second is from the remnant, right? The lipoprotein remnant, for example, chylomicron remnant, right? Uptake by the liver, so the triglyceride being repacked in the VLDL. And lastly is the fatty acids levels in the circulation, basically from the fasting condition, right, from the mobilization of the triglyceride from the adipose tissue. Also under the disease condition, like a diabetic patient, also have a higher levels of fatty acids that can also pick up by liver. The synthesis of VLDL should also be increased during their diabetic condition, right? Okay, now let's talk about metabolism of VLDL. So how VLDL transported triglyceride from liver to the peripheral tissue. And I'm going to divide it in 2 slides, right, to describe this, because it depends on the nutritional status. Like under fat or fasting condition, the destination of a VLDL can be different, right? I mentioned a little bit, but I wanted to talk about it in a bit more detail. So you need to focus on both the nutritional state, physiological state, right? Whether under the fat or fasting condition, and also the destination tissue where does VLDL go, right? Now let's talk about under the fat condition. The VLDL is synthesized in the liver, right? And again, triglyceride is the major lipids in the core. I also have has the cholesterol esters, and B100 is the main ApoB protein on the surface of VLDL. Once it's synthesized in the liver, usually also in the form of so-called nascent VLDL, because of the this lacking of ApoC or ApoE, right? And once it's received ApoC or ApoE from HDL, and nascent VLDL then become mature VLDL. And similarly to the chylomicron, right? Triglyceride in the VLDL is also need to be hydrolyzed by the LPL, right? And also need a ApoC2 to make the LPL functioning. So similar process, right? Triglycerides break down and release fatty acids, and fatty acids being taken up by adipose tissue in the fat condition, right? And this fatty acids, once it's arrived inside of fat cells and be resynthesized to triglyceride and stored in the fat tissue, fat cells, right? This something happening under the fat condition. And VLDL, once it's released, majority of a triglyceride and then become remnant, VLDL remnant, which is IDL. So IDL is VLDL remnant and contains much less triglyceride in the core, and also lose the ApoC, right? So give ApoC back to the HDL, which makes sense because once you have an ApoC, particularly ApoC2 on the surface, then you will keep this enzyme active, right? So you will continue to hydrolyze. So once you lose the ApoC2, then this LPL cannot be functioning well, right? So that can stop, hydrolyze the triglyceride. So IDL, the VLDL remnant, then be picked up by liver and also other peripheral tissue, for example, artery wall macrophages, right? We're going to talk about later. And IDL continue losing the triglyceride and eventually become the cholesterol ester-rich lipoprotein, which is LDL, right? So LDL and become be picked up by liver and other peripheral tissue cells. So again, under the fat condition, VLDL is transported to adipose tissue, right? And the fatty acids then pick up from the triglyceride in the VLDL, usually is resynthesized, right, to triglyceride and stored in the fat tissue. So 2 questions you probably wanted to understand and remember, the metabolic fate of a VLDL during the fat condition. First is where do fatty acids go? Basically to the fat tissue, right? Adipose tissue. And what is the fate of fatty acids in the adipose tissue? You reacidify to triglyceride and stored in the adipose tissue, right? Now, under the fasting condition, the process will be same, right? Synthesized nascent VLDL in the liver and become receiving ApoC, ApoE, and become a mature VLDL. And the destination is different that I mentioned earlier, right? Under the fasting condition, VLDL is synthesized in the liver, basically is transported to muscle, right? And once the muscle can also release or synthesize LPL, right? Similar to adipose tissue, but under the different physiologic condition. So fasting condition, muscle LPL are active, right? Are activated, so can hydrolyze triglyceride in the VLDL and pick up fatty acids. And these fatty acids are not going to be resynthesized to triglyceride, but to be oxidized in the muscle for energy during the fasting condition. Right? Does that make sense? So try to remember the metabolism of VLDL in two different physiological states, right? They are different, and remember these two questions, right? Any questions? Okay. And we're going to explain a little bit more detailed later, why eventually IDL become LDL, losing more triglyceride, gain more cholesterol, because there is so-called lipid exchange between LDL and HDL, right? So that means you transfer more triglyceride from LDL to HDL, and you also have a back, transfer the cholesterol esters from HDL to LDL. So eventually the LDL will lose the triglyceride and get a more cholesterol esters from HDL. This is just the overall summary of the VLDL metabolic fate. Again, the mature VLDL, once it's arrived in the, either adipose tissue during fat condition or muscle during fasting condition, the triglyceride inside of VLDL can be break down by LPL, right, lipoprotein lipase, and with assistance, right, the ApoC2 assistance, and release the triglyceride, and also losing the ApoC, and become VLDL remnant, IDL. And there also exists exchange of lipids between HDL and IDL. So eventually, IDL continuing losing triglyceride and gain more cholesterol esters, so eventually become the cholesterol ester rich LDL, right? So the different type of lipoproteins, sometimes they can if they are related, they can be changed depending on the metabolic state, right? So both IDL and LDL can be picked up by the liver and also other the peripheral tissues like artery wall and macrophages, right? So that something related to the atherosclerosis, disease condition. Now I wanted to talk about a little more about the LPL. I think we pretty much clear, right? LPL, and just see it. I think have a sort of a good summary slide. So LDL both. I'm not sure if you guys have all this blank field, your notes, or still field? No? Okay. So which tissue actually synthesizes the LPL? Two tissues, right? Adipose tissue and muscle. And LPL basically is located on the wall of capillary endothelium within the tissue, right? They present in the circulation, but not like the big vessel, but large vessel, but usually it's the capillary within the tissue. Both adipose tissue, muscle, including skeletal muscle and heart, and not LPL is not expressed or present in the liver. Liver has its own lipase, right, called hepatic lipase. So which triglyceride in which lipoprotein that are hydrolyzed by hepatic lipase? Remnant, right? Chylomicron remnant is the whole thing being taken by the liver. So hepatic lipase basically hydrolyzed triglyceride in chylomicron remnant. So the function of lipoprotein lipase is to hydrolyze triglyceride and release fatty acids that can be transported into tissue, either adipose tissue or muscle, right? And LPL has the different activities in different tissues. For example, in muscle LPL usually have a lower Km for triglyceride. So that means when we have very high levels of triglyceride in the circulation, particularly in the VLDL, then muscle LPL can be activated. And for adipose tissue, basically you have a higher Km, right, for triglyceride. But that's okay as long as we remember the different physiological state. So during fasting, LPL activity is higher in which tissue? Fasting, which tissue LPL? Muscle, yes. So muscle tissue had higher LPL activity during fasting. And what about in the fat condition? Which tissue? Adipose tissue, right? Okay. And also want you to remember LPL activity requires the presence of ApoC2, right? And insulin stimulates LPL synthesis secretion from which tissue? Which tissue's LPL is regulated by insulin? Muscle or adipose tissue? Adipose tissue, yes. Yeah, you connect it with the fat condition, right? You always have a high insulin, so insulin usually regulates the fat tissue. Okay, I have two questions here. So how are triglyceride in VLDL and chylomicron metabolize. That means they need to be uptake into the tissues, right? How are triglycerides metabolized in these two lipoproteins? You know the process, if you still remember. Transported from either intestine or liver to adipose tissue or to muscle, and what will happen? Right, and the next step. Yeah, how adipose tissue takes fatty acid? LPL, yes, thank you. So LPS released, right, from fat tissue, adipose tissue, or muscle, and to hydrolyze triglycerides, to break down triglycerides and release fatty acids. So fatty acids are able to be uptaken by fat cell or muscle cell, right? So which enzyme is key for VLDL and chylomicron triglyceride metabolism or hydrolysis? LPL, right? LPL. That is a key enzyme. Does that make sense? Okay. So more information, I just give kind of diagram to help you understand better. The LPL in adipose tissue usually is increased, right, under the fat condition, and hydrolyzed triglyceride in both chylomicron or VLDL, right? Under fat condition, there are actually two lipoproteins that are being transported to adipose tissue. Chylomicron from small intestine and also VLDL, right, from the liver. Both carry the triglyceride, right, to the adipose tissue. So LPL released from adipose tissue hydrolyzed triglyceride in both chylomicron and VLDL, and then pick up fatty acids. And under the fasting condition or exercise, the fatty acids released from adipose tissue, right? So I mentioned, right, one of the sources of fatty acids in the VLDL triglyceride is from circulating fatty acids, right, during fasting. So fasting have lots of fatty acids released, and liver picks up and synthesize triglyceride and pack into VLDL and transport it to muscle, not adipose tissue, right, under fasting condition or exercise. So muscle LPL is synthesized and released and hydrolyzed triglyceride in VLDL and pick up the fatty acids. And this fatty acids will go to the oxidation pathway, right, for energy production. Okay, any questions? All right, so now I think we finished the triglyceride-rich lipoprotein metabolism, chylomicron and VLDL, right? Now we start to talk about the cholesterol metabolism. Cholesterol-rich lipoproteins, which are LDL and HDL. So basically, sometimes, people can just categorize the lipoprotein into two simple categories, like good cholesterol or bad cholesterol, right? So, for example, HDL is considered the good cholesterol, and LDL and the other remnant, right, is considered like bad cholesterol. So because of these two type of category of lipoprotein, they have a different function. For example, HDL basically transport cholesterol from peripheral tissue or from artery walls and back to liver for excretion or for the disposal, right? So HDL is considered as good, right? You will clean up the unnecessary cholesterol and prevent the deposition of the extra unnecessary cholesterol in the body. So it's considered good cholesterol. And the non-HDL cholesterol, like including all the other type of lipoprotein, particularly LDL, is called bad cholesterol. And the reason because LDL basically deposits the cholesterol into the cell, into the artery wall cells. So it is not good, right? If we have a higher LDL, that means you push more cholesterol into the cells and causing the accumulation. If it is accumulated in the macrophages, and it can form so-called foam cells, right? We're going to discuss later about atherosclerosis. So causing the atherosclerosis. Okay, now let's talk about LDL. So LDL is the cholesterol-rich lipoproteins, or the bad cholesterol proteins, right? Lipoproteins. So what are the core lipids? What you would expect in the LDL? Which type of lipids should be higher? Two types, right? Triglyceride and cholesterol ester. Which cholesterol ester, right? So cholesterol esters should be the main lipids in the LDL core, and it also contains some triglyceride. Apoproteins, kind of simple for memorization, right? LDL only has a ApoB100, which is important, right? For LDL to bind LDL receptor for LDL uptake. Without the ApoB100 or some disease condition, ApoB100 is mutated. So then the LDL cannot be uptake by LDL receptor, and then you will have more LDL will remain in the circulation, right? According to the high levels of cholesterol, LDL cholesterol in the circulation. And these high levels of cholesterol will deposit in the artery wall and macrophages and causing atherosclerosis. IDL is a VLDL remnant. And IDL core lipids also contains the cholesterol esters and triglyceride and apoproteins, and ApoB100 and ApoE. Okay, so the metabolism, so how LDL is metabolized, that is definitely related to the cholesterol metabolism, right, or homeostasis. LDL usually is taken up into cells through the LDL receptors, right? So LDL, if LDL wanted to get into the cells and need to bind LDL receptor, and LDL receptors help uptake the LDL into the cells. And we mentioned earlier the ApoB100 and ApoE, these two apoproteins, that mediates the binding of LDL or IDL to LDL receptors. So LDL binding requires ApoB100 and ApoE on the surface of LDL, right? We need to a normal function of ApoB100 and ApoE. And LDL receptor is produced mainly in the liver. So liver has the high levels of LDL receptor. That means liver takes a majority of LDL, right, in the circulation. So most of the LDL in the circulation goes to the liver or picked up by the liver, because of the liver has a high levels of LDL receptor compared to other tissue cells. And the last point I think is very important. So the number of LDL receptor in the liver determine the rate of internalization or uptake of LDL, and not the concentration of LDL in the plasma. Does this make sense? Because of LDL uptake requires LDL receptor, right? Binding the LDL receptor. If you don't have an LDL receptor, that LDL cannot be uptaken into the cell, so they'll remain in the circulation. So the LDL receptor is a key, right, that control the LDL level in the circulation, and not the circulation level itself, right? Does that make sense? For example, I just make a comparison, like one person, you have a normal number of LDL receptor on the liver cells, right? And they can pick up LDL from the circulation normally. So it can maintain the normal levels of LDL in the circulation, right? And compared to the other person that has a lower levels of LDL receptor on the surface of the liver cells, then this person cannot pick up less LDL from the circulation into the cells, right? So you have more LDL that remaining in the circulation, have a higher levels of LDL. Does that make sense? So the LDL receptor number is a key, right? Is a determining factor that regulating the cholesterol level or LDL cholesterol levels in the circulation in the blood. Okay, now let's just give you a more detailed about the LDL receptor. How does the LDL receptor work, right? LDL receptor is a single transmembrane protein, so it's located on the surface, right? This is the cell surface, right? And this is the inside of surface cytosol. So LDL receptor is the LDL receptor, and this yellow ball is represent kind of a LDL, right? Lipoprotein. So LDL receptor located on the surface of the cells and has a binding site of ApoB100 or ApoE, right? And ApoE or ApoB basically located on the surface of the LDL, right? So this binding protein, ApoE or ApoB100, can bind the binding site on the LDL receptor. So once LDL receptor binds to LDL binds to LDL receptor, that the whole thing will be internalized, right, into the cells. So this process called a receptor-mediated endocytosis process, right? And the binding of a LDL to LDL receptor requires the ApoB100 and ApoE present on the surface. Right? Does that make sense? And it's just a different version of the LDL receptor mediated endocytosis, and again, this is the cell surface, membrane, and cytosol. LDL binds its receptor and internalize, and the membranes and receptors actually recycle, right, and back to the cell surface, and the lipids, then and also apoproteins eventually being digested inside of cells, right? And protein can be digested into amino acids, and lipids like cholesterol, particularly, being released from the LDL and to free cholesterol. And free cholesterol eventually being reacidified to cholesterol esters in the cells. And depend on which type of cells, the cholesterol esters can be used either for synthesis of the steroid hormones or bile acid in the liver, right, and for disposal. So this is the reaction called reacidification of a cholesterol to form cholesterol esters in the cell. So basically, it's the one fatty acids attached to free cholesterol molecules and form cholesterol esters. And this is the enzyme ACAT. It's the acyl-CoA cholesterol and acyl-transferase. ACAT is the enzyme that catalyzes the acidification of cholesterol, free cholesterol, right? So cholesterol ester can provide the substrate for synthesis of bile acid and steroid hormone, again, depending on which type of cells, right? And also, basically, this occurs primarily in the liver. And cholesterol ester can also provide the core lipids for the chylomicron and VLDL synthesis. And if it happens in the macrophages, right, under disease condition, then cholesterol esters can form the firm cells, right? You know, have a lot of cholesterol esters accumulate inside of macrophages, and the macrophage just few kind of lipids, right? Fill with the lipids and become the firm cell. And this is the basis of the atherosclerosis, right? So-called atheroma formation. And or cholesterol ester can be hydrolyzed by HSL and to release free cholesterol whenever it's needed, right? Okay, so that was LDL. Now let's move on to HDL. So HDL, similar to LDL, is also called cholesterol lipoprotein, right? So that means this also deals with the cholesterol metabolism. So the core lipids in the HDL, cholesterol esters and triglyceride, and apoprotein on the HDL are ApoA1 and ApoA2. And the place where HDL synthesized is in the liver and also intestine, right? And so what are the functions of HDL? HDL is considered good cholesterol, right? So mean that they do something good for the our body. So what HDL does is to help keep the cholesterol homeostasis. So basically, HDL and transport cholesterol from peripheral tissue back to the liver, that can imbalance, right, with the transport of cholesterol from liver to peripheral tissue. So back and forth, cholesterol can be synthesized in the liver and transported to the other tissue for their needs, right? And also when we have too much cholesterol, we need a balance, right? Peripheral cell tissue can also synthesize cholesterol. So once we have too much cholesterol, and we wanted to prevent the accumulation of unnecessary cholesterol. The cholesterol need to be disposed, and HDL does this function, right? So transport unnecessary cholesterol from peripheral tissue back to the liver for disposal. So once this cholesterol being transported back to the liver, they can be either used for synthesis of bile acid and excreted, right, or used for synthesis of steroid hormone. So HDL is very important, and that good thing for maintain the cholesterol homeostasis and to prevent some disease such as atherosclerosis, right? So there is one concept is important in terms of the HDL function. It's so-called reverse cholesterol transport. So reverse cholesterol transport means that transport cholesterol from peripheral tissue back to the liver, and this reverse cholesterol transport is accomplished by HDL cycles, right? So HDL cycles basically is a cycle that it is kind of conversion back and forth, alpha HDL and beta HDL. So in our body, there are two different types of HDL present, alpha HDL and beta HDL. And these two types of HDL can be converted, right? It's kind of dynamic process. And these two type of HDL has a different function, right? Let me just I think before and talk about details of HDL cycle, I just want you guys to watch a movie. I guess it will probably take about 10 minutes, so about the time, right?